The man had everything people usually dream about. A tall glass building carried his company's name at the top, shining every night like a symbol of success. His office sat on the highest floor where the city looked small and quiet below him. Meetings followed his schedule. Staff stood up when he entered rooms. News channels spoke about him with respect. To the world, he was a story of discipline, hard work, and victory. Yet his house was always silent. The rooms were wide, clean, and expensive, but empty. Even dinner was usually eaten alone, standing near the kitchen counter, scrolling through emails on a phone worth more than some people's yearly income. His days were filled with numbers, contracts, and deadlines. He believed emotions slowed people down. Hunger was just a word, not a feeling he remembered anymore. That belief was shaped by his past. He had grown up poor in a crowded home where every rupee mattered. He remembered skipping sweets as a child to save money and working while studying. But as he climbed higher, those memories faded. Success taught him that struggle was temporary, and effort always paid back. He convinced himself that anyone could escape hardship if they tried hard enough. That idea became his shield. One winter evening, after a long business trip, his driver took a different route because of road construction. Traffic slowed. Red lights felt longer than usual. Neon signs flickered by. For the first time in months, the man looked out the window instead of his phone. That was when he saw the line. People stood outside a small food center, wrapped in torn jackets and thin shawls. Some held children close to their bodies. Others looked too weak to care who was watching. Steam rose from large metal pots, carrying the smell of lentils and bread. Volunteers moved quickly, serving small portions. The line was long, quiet, and calm. Like everyone understood the order of suffering, the car slowed further. A child stepped out of the line and walked toward the traffic. He was thin, his clothes too big for his body, his eyes locked onto the back seat window. Not in a rude way. Not demanding. Just hopeful. The driver noticed and tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Sir, should I speed up?" he asked softly. The man hesitated. He reached into his pocket, feeling the smooth edge of his phone. Then he shook his head. He was late. He had emails to answer and a call scheduled with overseas partners. There were charities, systems, governments for this kind of thing, he told himself. He looked away. The car moved on. The child did not follow. He returned to the line. That moment lasted less than 10 seconds. For the man, it felt insignificant. For someone else, it was everything. That night, the man attended a private dinner in a luxury hotel. Soft music played. Plates were replaced half full. No one asked about the food left untouched. Conversations floated around profits, land, and future investments. Someone joked about poverty being exaggerated online. The man laughed lightly, though the child's eyes crossed his mind for a second. Later, alone in his room, he stood by the large window. Down below, the city kept breathing. Cars passed. People moved. Somewhere out there, unknown lives were unfolding. He poured a drink, then stopped. The glass stayed on the table. He went to sleep without finishing it. The next morning, headlines flashed across screens. A tragedy near the same food center had taken place in the early hours. A sudden disturbance. A weak body collapsing. Chaos that lasted minutes, but changed everything at first. He didn't read further. By afternoon, the story was everywhere. A local reporter mentioned CCTV footage. A luxury car. A brief pause. A child approaching the window. Clear images. Clear timing. The man's name had not been mentioned yet. But his driver knew, and deep inside, so did he. For the first time in years, his chest felt heavy. Not from stress or anger, but something unfamiliar. Guilt had entered quietly, without asking permission. He tried to push the thought away. He reminded himself of donations, of taxes paid, of foundations his company supported, but the mind is stubborn when truth knocks. That evening, he skipped dinner. Across the city, candles were being lit, not in anger yet, but in remembrance. Photos were shared. A small face was now known by millions. The man sat alone again, staring at the empty plate in front of him. This time, hunger was not just a memory. It was a question, and it was about to demand an answer. Morning came slowly for the city, but it arrived heavy. The air felt different, as if people were walking through a shared silence. News screens in shops replayed the same clips again and again. Social media feeds were filled with one picture, one short video, one question repeating everywhere. People were not angry yet. They were confused. Confusion has a quiet sound. It looks like pauses between words, eyes staring too long, hands stopped in motion. The man woke up before his alarm. That rarely happened. He sat up in bed with a dry mouth and a tight chest. For a moment, he didn't remember why. Then, the image returned. The child. The traffic light. The window. He reached for his phone. Messages were waiting. Many more than usual. Some from his office, some from unknown numbers. A few headlines were already saved in his notifications. He didn't open them immediately. He went to the bathroom, washed his face, and looked at himself in the mirror. The reflection was the same man the world admired. Neatly trimmed beard, sharp eyes, calm posture, but something behind the eyes had shifted. At the food center, volunteers arrived early. The smell of warm bread floated again, but the line was shorter. Some people were afraid. Some were grieving. A few stood quietly with their hands folded, whispering prayers. Candles from the night before had melted into thin white trails on the ground. A woman who volunteered there every weekend wiped her hands on her apron and stared at the empty space near the large metal pots. She remembered the child clearly. He always waited without pushing, always thanked her even when portions were small. She didn't know much about his life, just that he came alone. By noon, reporters surrounded the area. Questions flew in all directions. Most answers were guesses. People pointed toward the road, the traffic light. The place where the luxury car had slowed, someone said, if the window had opened. Maybe things would be different, or maybe the word traveled faster than truth. At the man's office, meetings were canceled quietly. Staff members spoke in low voices. No one used his name out loud, but everyone knew the link was coming. Security teams watched phones closely. Lawyers made their way to conference rooms without being summoned. He arrived late when he stepped into the building. The usual greeting felt forced. He nodded but did not stop. His legs moved out of habit, not intention. In a closed room, screens showed paused footage. The video was grainy, but clear enough. The car, the pause. The figure approaching, the man sat down slowly. This doesn't prove wrongdoing, a legal advisor said carefully. There was no direct action. The man said nothing. What matters, another voice continued, is controlling the narrative. That word hit him harder than expected. Narrative? Was this just a story to manage? Outside the room, phones buzzed nonstop. The video had been shared millions of times. People added captions. Some accused. Some defended. Some asked questions. A few still believed the rich owed nothing to anyone. Supporters reminded others of his charity records. Old photos surfaced showing him smiling at donation events. Graphs were posted. Numbers defended him, but numbers could not replace 10 seconds at the food center. The woman volunteer was interviewed by a local channel. She chose her words slowly. Hunger makes people quiet, she said. It makes children brave in strange ways. The clip spread widely. Around evening, the man found himself driving again through the same route, this time without meetings, without speed. The driver glanced at him through the mirror but said nothing. The traffic light turned red. The car stopped. The man stared at the exact place the child had stood. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. He opened the window slightly. Cold air rushed in. The smell of food was not there. The pots were empty. Only a few people stood around, talking softly. Someone had placed flowers near the pole. His throat tightened. For the first time, he wondered about the child's name, not out of curiosity, but regret. That night, a statement was released by his company. Neutral words. Careful sentences. Sympathy expressed. No admission. No denial. The man did not write it. As reactions poured in, anger finally arrived. Anger is loud. It marches. It chants. It points fingers. People gathered outside buildings. Signs were lifted. Questions were shouted. Is wealth an excuse to look away? The man watched from inside. His phone rang. Family members asked if he was okay. Old friends gave advice. Some told him to stay quiet. Others told him to fight. None asked how he felt. Late at night, he sat alone on the floor of his living room. The furniture felt distant, unused, like it belonged to someone else. He remembered his own childhood. Remembered waiting outside a bakery once, hoping someone would drop a piece of bread. Why had he forgotten so completely? Across the city, online discussions grew heated. Comments turned cruel. Some wished punishment. Some defended status. Truth became harder to see through noise. Authorities announced an inquiry. That single sentence pushed the story into a new phase. The man closed his eyes. This was no longer about whether he could help. It was about whether his choice to look away would define who he truly was. And for the first time, he realized money could not protect him from memory. Sleep did not come. Judgment had not arrived yet. But it was walking closer with every hour. The days that followed moved strangely. Time felt rushed and slow at the same moment. Every hour brought new voices, new opinions, new versions of the same 10 seconds. The man stayed away from cameras, but cameras did not stay away from him. They waited outside buildings, near gates. Beside roads he once traveled without notice. Inside his home, silence grew heavier. He stopped checking the news, yet somehow the news still reached him. Friends called less often. Colleagues spoke more carefully. The world that once felt controlled now felt unpredictable. A formal notice arrived, simple and official. An inquiry had been launched. Statements would be recorded. Footage would be reviewed. The process would take time. Time was the last thing he wanted. His legal team advised him to remain calm and say little. They reminded him that intention mattered, that he had not caused harm directly, that sympathy could be expressed without responsibility. He listened, nodded, agreed. But when he was alone, none of those words helped him sleep. At night, memories returned without warning. Not just the child, but other moments he had ignored over the years. A hand held out at a traffic signal. A tired face knocking on a car window. He had always believed he was being practical, not cruel. He told himself society worked better with rules and distance. Now that belief felt hollow. Public discussions grew sharper. Podcasts debated morality. News anchors argued politely. Online users were not polite at all. Some demanded punishment. Others mocked sensitivity. A few simply asked why one open window felt so impossible in a world full of closed hearts. The man watched none of it directly. Well, he felt it all the same. Pressure has a way of seeping through walls. The food center reopened with new security. Donations poured in from strangers. Volunteers doubled. Yet the woman who had served there for years noticed something painful. For every new plate served, there was still an empty place in her memory. She spoke during the inquiry. Not with anger, not with blame, just calm truth. She described the quiet order of the line, the patience of hunger, and the courage it takes for a child to step forward. Her words carried weight. The man was called to give a preliminary statement. The room was clean and plain. No cameras. Just recorded voices and written notes. He sat straight, hands folded. His voice remained controlled. Small pauses betrayed him. When asked why he did not respond, he said he was late and distracted. It sounded weak even to his own ears. When asked if he felt responsible, he paused longer. "I feel regret," he said finally. The room went quiet. Regret was not guilt. It was not innocence either. It hovered somewhere in between, uncomfortable and unclear. Outside reactions split once more. Some praised honesty. Others accused him of choosing the safest word. At home, he tried to return to routine. Morning workouts, short meetings, emails answered late. But routine no longer brought control. Every task felt mechanical, like acting a role he no longer believed in. One afternoon, he visited a place he hadn't seen in decades. A narrow street where he had once lived with his family. The buildings looked smaller. The smells were stronger. Children played loudly without noticing him. He stood there quietly. No one recognized him. That anonymity felt like relief. He remembered standing in line for donated meals as a boy, pretending it was normal. Remembered his mother whispering promises of better days. He had believed success meant never standing in that line again. He had been wrong. Success had only moved the line somewhere else. The inquiry results were expected soon. Reporters prepared stories in advance, changing only final details. Protesters gathered again, not just against him, but against what he represented. Wealth without connection. Power without pause. One sign read, "Indifference is a choice." The words stayed with him. That night, his legal team suggested a public appearance. Controlled environment. Carefully written statement. Apology without admission, he agreed. On the day of the appearance, the hall was packed. Cameras clicked endlessly. He stood at the podium, lights bright, face calm. The statement was read exactly as written. He expressed sorrow. He acknowledged pain. He promised cooperation. It was perfect. It felt empty. As he stepped back, a question was shouted from the crowd. If you could go back, would you open the window? Security moved quickly, cutting sound, guiding him away. But the question had already reached him. Would he? The inquiry concluded soon after. Findings were released to the public. No criminal intent was stated. No clear violation was recorded. Yet responsibility was not dismissed. The language was careful. The reaction was not. Anger returned stronger than before. People felt let down by systems, not just a man. Discussion shifted from law to conscience, from legality to humanity. The man read the report alone. Each word felt heavier than the last. He had not been cleared in the way he had hoped. Nor had he been condemned fully. He was stuck in between again. That evening, another notice arrived. This time, it was a court summons. The case had moved forward not because of crime alone, but because society demanded an answer larger than legal definitions. A judge would decide how responsibility should be measured. When harm grows from silence, the man closed the envelope slowly, for the first time since everything began. He did not feel afraid. He felt ready. Outside, the city moved as always. Traffic lights changed. People waited. Lines formed, and somewhere, a window stood between choice and consequence. The world was watching what he would do next. The day of the hearing arrived without drama from the sky. No storms, no sudden darkness. Just an ordinary morning that felt heavier than most. People gathered outside the courthouse early, holding phones instead of signs this time. They weren't shouting. They were waiting inside. The building smelled of old paper and polished floors. Every step echoed, reminding everyone that this place existed to slow things down, to look carefully, to decide with rules instead of emotions. The man walked in quietly, surrounded by advisors, but feeling alone. Cameras flashed for only a moment before doors closed behind him. The courtroom was full. Reporters filled the back rows. Observers sat close together. Silence settled as the judge entered. It wasn't the sharp silence of fear, but the tense kind that comes when people expect something important. The man took a seat. He kept his back straight, his hands rested together. He had rehearsed this moment many times in his mind. Yet now that it was here, the preparation felt smaller than expected. The case began without drama. Dates were read. Events were confirmed. Footage was referenced. On a screen, the familiar video played again. The pause. The shadow of a child. The car moving forward, no sound was played. It didn't need it. The man watched without blinking. This time, there was nowhere to look away. The judge asked questions calmly, clearly. Did you see the child? Yes, the man replied. Did you consider responding? Yes. Why did you not? He paused. For the first time since this began, he did not reach for practiced words. I thought someone else would, he said. A soft movement passed through the room. Not sound, just reaction. Witnesses were called. The volunteer spoke again. Her voice remained steady. She described the line, the waiting, the hunger, that had become routine for people forgotten by busy streets. She did not accuse. She did not name him directly. She simply spoke of reality. A transport worker testified about traffic that evening. A security officer explained the footage. Each voice added weight, brick by brick, building something invisible but solid. When it was the man's turn to speak, the room leaned in. Not physically, but emotionally. He stood slowly. He did not deny his success. He did not blame fear or safety. He did not argue intention. Instead, spoke about distance. He spoke about how wealth had placed glass not only on car windows, but around his life. How comfort had convinced him that systems would catch everyone he passed by. How forgetting suffering was easier when hunger was no longer personal. I did not harm with my hands, he said, but I harmed with indifference. Quiet filled the room. Some faces softened. Some hardened, legal arguments followed. Responsibility was debated. The line between moral failure and legal fault was examined carefully. The judge listened without expression, taking notes, asking questions that cut through rehearsed answers. Time stretched when the judge finally spoke again. The voice was calm but firm. This court is not here to punish wealth, the judge said, and not here to turn compassion into law. But it is here to remind society that choices exist even in silence. The judgment was not what many expected. There was no prison sentence. There was no simple fine. Instead, the ruling focused on accountability. The man was ordered to step away from his executive role for a fixed period, to fund but not control programs addressing hunger, to serve regularly, without cameras, in community food centers, and to publicly acknowledge, in his own words, the cost of looking away. The courtroom murmured. Some felt it was too soft. Others felt it was harsher than jail ever could be. The judge ended with words that spread faster than headlines. Punishment ends. Responsibility stays. The man nodded slowly. Outside, reactions exploded again. Some called it historic. Some called it symbolic. Debates flooded screens. But beneath the noise, something quieter happened. People started talking to each other. That evening, the man returned home without escort. He removed his jacket and placed it carefully on a chair. The house still felt large, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. He sat at the table and wrote, not a statement from advisors, not polished words, just honest ones. He wrote about hunger, about forgetting, about a child whose name he never learned. When he finished, felt tired in a way that sleep could not fix. Outside, the city lights turned on, one by one. Lines still formed. Traffic lights still paused cars. But somewhere between judgment and choice, a window had finally opened. Life did not change all at once after the judgment. There were no loud celebrations, no sudden peace. Change arrived quietly, the way morning light enters a room, slowly revealing what had always been there. The man stepped away from his position just as ordered. The announcement was short. Markets reacted. Analysts talked, but he did not watch any of it. For the first time in decades, his calendar was almost empty. The first day without meetings felt strange. He woke up early out of habit, stood by the window, and watched people hurry to work below. He realized how rarely he had done that without judging time. That afternoon, he arrived at a small food center on the edge of the city. No banners, no cameras. Just a narrow doorway and the sound of metal pots being moved. He was given a simple apron. No one treated him like a guest. He was shown where to stand. At first, his movements were stiff. He followed instructions carefully, afraid of doing something wrong. Serving food felt different from donating money. It required attention, eye contact, patience. People came quietly. Some smiled. Some avoided looking up. A few recognized him, but said nothing. One child stood in line holding an empty bowl. The man felt his chest tighten, but he focused on the task. He served carefully, making sure the portion was full, then hesitated and added a little more. "Thank you," the child said softly. The words stayed with him all day. Weeks passed. The routine settled in. 2 days each week, he returned. He cleaned tables. He listened. He learned names and stories, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He stopped wearing expensive watches. Not as a statement. He just didn't see the point anymore at home. He cooked for himself. Simple meals. Rice, bread, soup. He noticed how different food tasted. When it was prepared with care instead of speed, the public attention faded slowly. New stories replaced the old. But in some places, change continued. Funding helped expand food centers. More volunteers joined. Not because of him alone, but because the story had stirred something deeper. Sometimes, people asked him if he felt punished. He always answered the same way: "I feel responsible."
Ow.
One evening, the woman volunteered from before sat beside him after closing time. They didn't talk much, just watched the last visitor leave. "You keep coming back," she finally said. He nodded. "I need to." "No," she replied gently. "You choose to." That difference mattered. On the anniversary of the incident, the man walked alone to the same traffic light. It looked ordinary. Cars stopped and moved as usual. No one noticed him standing there. He held a small paper bag in his hand. Inside was food, warm and simple. He placed it near the pole where flowers had once been laid. There was no speech. No announcement, just silence. In the months that followed, he began speaking in small rooms, not large halls. He talked to students, workers, and business leaders. He didn't preach. He shared his failure. He told them how easy it was to believe someone else would help, and how costly that belief could be. Many listened. Some argued, but everyone remembered the child's name was never fully known to the public. And maybe that was fitting. The story had never been about fame. It was about a moment. It was about choice. Hunger remained in the world. The man understood that now better than ever. One person could not fix it all, but one person could open a window. Years later, a reporter asked him if he wished he could erase that night. He shook his head. "I wish I had acted differently," he said. "But I cannot erase what taught me how to act at all." The reporter turned off the recorder. As the man walked away, he passed a line outside a food center. He joined it not in front, it's not behind, but beside the people he now understood. He waited. The light turned green, and this time did not look away. Time changed the story in ways no courtroom ever could. The noise faded. The anger cooled. What remained was quieter and heavier, like a responsibility that did not need reminders anymore. The man no longer counted weeks or months. Life had settled into a different rhythm. He still lived in the same house, but it felt altered, as if its walls had learned to listen. Mornings were no longer rushed. He woke up earlier than needed and spent a few minutes, sitting in silence before the day began. Service had stopped feeling like a task. It had become normal. At the food center, new faces appeared often. Some stayed. Some moved on. Hunger had many shapes, and not all of them looked the same twice. The man noticed details he once ignored. How people thanked with their eyes when words failed. How pride kept many from stepping forward until they had no strength left. One afternoon, a man roughly his own age said quietly, "I used to manage people too." The statement surprised him. They spoke while washing dishes. About jobs lost slowly, not suddenly. About families shrinking into silence. About how fast respect disappears when money does. The conversation followed him home. He began to understand something important. Hunger was not always caused by laziness or bad decisions. Often, it was caused by time running out while people were still trying. This understanding changed. The way he spoke when invited to talks. He avoided stages. Preferred chairs and circles. He He spoke less about himself and more about listening. "I didn't change because I was punished," he told a small group once. "I changed because I finally paid attention." Some nodded. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Change often makes people uneasy. The programs he funded expanded quietly. He refused to attach his name. When asked why, he answered simply, "Hunger does not need branding." There were still critics. There always would be. Some believed what he did could never erase what he failed to do. He didn't argue with them. "They're right," he said more than once. "It can't be erased." With time, the memory of that night became less sharp, but more meaningful. It no longer attacked him in sleep. Instead, it guided him when choices appeared small and optional. At traffic lights, he noticed hands raised outside windows. He opened his. Sometimes he had food. Sometimes he didn't, but he always acknowledged the person. A nod. A few words' presence. It mattered. One evening, as winter returned, he saw a young volunteer struggling to manage a line alone. Without thinking, he stepped in. They worked side by side without introductions. The volunteer spoke fast, nervous. "Some days it feels pointless," the volunteer said. "Like the line never ends." The man smiled gently. "The line doesn't need to end," he said. "People just need to be seen while standing in it." The words surprised even him. Later that night, he wrote them down. He had started writing again. Not for publishing. Just for himself. He described days honestly. No lessons forced. No dramatic endings, just truth. Across the city, small changes became visible. More community kitchens. More shared tables. People who once argued online now volunteered offline. Not everyone had been moved by the story, but enough had. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single line written unevenly. "Thank you for not looking away anymore." He held the paper for a long time. That night, he revisited the intersection again, standing on the same corner. Cars passed. Lights changed. The city breathed. He realized something then that felt strangely. Peaceful justice had not ended the story. It had only opened it. Not every good action would be seen. Not every choice would be recognized. And that was fine, because real judgment, he now understood, happens quietly inside a person when no one is watching. As he walked away from the intersection, the streetlight flickered briefly, then steadied. The road ahead was long, and for the first time, he was ready to walk it. Years passed, not marked by headlines or anniversaries, but by quiet habits that became permanent. The man's life no longer felt divided into before and after. It felt continuous now, stitched together by choices made daily, often unnoticed. He never returned to his old position. Offers came, tempting and generous, but he declined them all, not out of guilt, but clarity. Leadership meant little to him if it kept him too far from people. Instead, he worked in small rooms, helping to guide community efforts from the background. He listened more than he spoke. When decisions were needed, he asked questions instead of giving orders. People who met him for the first time were often surprised. They expected someone loud or proud, defensive or broken. What they found was quiet focus and sincere attention. At food centers across the city, familiar faces greeted him like family. They asked about his health, laughed at small mistakes, teased him gently when he spilled soup or showed up late. He welcomed it. One afternoon, a young man waiting in line stayed behind after everyone else had left. He didn't ask for food. He asked for advice. "I don't want to end up like this forever," the young man said. "But I don't know another way." The man sat beside him. "I don't know your way either," he replied. "But I can walk with you while you find it." They met again the next week. And the next. Slowly, the man helped connect him to work programs, not with promises, but with presence. There were setbacks. Missed days, frustration, progress that felt too slow. Still, they didn't stop. This became a pattern, not saving people. Supporting them, the city itself seemed to soften over time. Not everywhere. Not always. But in small corners, kindness became visible in ways it hadn't before. Neighbors checked on neighbors. Shops placed water outside on hot days. More people stopped at red lights, thinking instead of scrolling. The story that once divided opinions had turned into a quiet reminder. Teachers mentioned it in classrooms. Parents referenced it during conversations about responsibility. The child's image was rarely shared now, and that felt right. One winter evening, the man was invited to speak at a small gathering. No press, no recordings, just faces. He spoke about success. "I thought success was reaching the top," he said. "Now I think it's noticing who didn't make it there." No one clapped. They nodded. When he returned home that night, he found his old executive badge in a drawer. He held it for a moment, then placed it back. It belonged to another life. Later that week, he spent an afternoon helping repaint a wall at a food center. Children dipped brushes into bright colors, laughing when paint splashed onto the floor. One child looked up at him and asked, "Why do you come here so much?" He thought carefully before answering, "Because this place reminds me who I am," he said. The child smiled without fully understanding. That was okay. As evening fell, he walked home past a familiar intersection. The traffic light flickered, then turned red. Cars stopped. A man stood nearby holding a sign asking for help. The man approached him, spoke briefly, and shared food. There was no hesitation. No memory rushed back, only awareness. Walking away. He realized something important. Redemption was not a moment, it was a direction, and he was still moving forward. The years that followed did not announce themselves with milestones or celebrations. They passed quietly, measured by habits that slowly became part of the man's nature. He no longer thought of himself as someone who had changed. Change was something he practiced, not something he claimed. His days began early. Not because of pressure, but because mornings felt honest. The city was softer before noise took over. He would sit near the window with a cup of tea and watch people begin their routines. Shopkeepers lifting metal shutters, workers waiting for buses, street cleaners doing work most people never thanked aloud. These moments grounded him. They reminded him that life moved forward. Whether or not anyone was watching, he never went back to the world that had once defined him. Invitations still arrived from time to time. Boards asked for his experience. Conferences wanted him as an example of leadership. He declined them politely. Not with anger. Not with fear. He simply knew that door no longer led where he needed to go. Instead, his life grew fuller around smaller things. He spent much of his time moving between food centers, shelters, and community spaces. Not to manage them, not to control outcomes, but to support what already existed. He learned how fragile good systems were and how much they depended on silent effort. He also learned how easily they fell apart without trust. At one food center, he became known as the quiet helper who always arrived before the rush. He chopped vegetables carefully, washed dishes slowly, and listened when people spoke. He never asked questions that pushed too far. He waited for trust to appear on its own. People noticed. One afternoon, an older man sat beside him after a meal. "You don't act like someone who is here to feel better about himself," the man said. The words stayed with him. In another part of the city, a woman who had attended one of his small talks began organizing shared kitchens in her neighborhood. She told him later that his story didn't inspire her because it was dramatic, but because it was ordinary. "I realized," she said, "that waiting for perfect people was costing us time." That idea spread slowly. The city did not change overnight. There was still hunger, still inequality, still long lines and tired faces, but something subtle shifted. People waited less for permission. They acted without asking if it would matter. The man watched this with quiet gratitude. He never believed his actions were the cause. He believed they were part of a wider awakening that had been waiting for someone to break the silence. One winter, he helped organize warm meal deliveries during harsh nights. The work was exhausting. His hands cracked from cold and labor. He welcomed the pain. It reminded him he was alive and useful. During one delivery, he met a teenager huddled outside a closed shop. The teenager accepted food without speaking. After a long pause, he asked, "Why are you doing this?" The man answered honestly, "Because I learned how heavy it feels when no one does." They sat quietly for a few minutes. No advice, no promises. Sometimes that was enough. As years passed, the man noticed changes within himself that felt deeper than behavior. His reactions softened. He listened without planning what to say next. He felt anger less often, but sadness more clearly. And strangely, that sadness didn't weaken him. It connected him to others. He also learned to forgive himself not by forgetting, but by accepting that growth often arrives through regret. On quiet evenings, he continued to write. His notebooks filled with small observations, a smile exchanged over a plate of food, a disagreement resolved through patience, a mistake made and corrected without drama. He never wrote about the incident directly anymore. That chapter existed on its own. Once a year, though, he returned to the same intersection late at night, not to punish himself, not to be seen, just to remember the cost of a closed window. He would stand there silently until the light changed, then walk away. In one of those visits, he noticed a woman handing food to people waiting at the signal. She didn't recognize him. She nodded once in greeting and continued. That moment felt like closure. He understood then. The story no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the choices others made because of it. At a community center, he began mentoring a small group of people trying to rebuild their lives after setbacks. The sessions were informal. Chairs in a circle. No speeches. Everyone spoke when ready. When asked about success, he avoided simple answers. Success used to mean avoiding pain, he said once. Now it means accepting responsibility for it. Some struggled with that idea. He did not insist. Trust grew slowly. Over time, a few of those he supported found stable work. Some moved away. Some returned just to say thank you. He accepted gratitude carefully, redirecting it whenever possible. I just didn't walk away, he reminded them. You did the rest. At home, his house felt different than it once had. It remained modest for its size. He had removed many things that no longer served a purpose. What remained felt intentional. The silence no longer felt empty. Occasionally, journalists reached out again, hoping for a follow-up story. He declined most requests. Once, he agreed to a single interview on the condition that no images from the past would be shown. During that interview, the reporter asked, "Do you think people have forgiven you?" He thought carefully. "I don't know," he said. "But I know forgiveness isn't the goal. Responsibility is." The reporter paused after that. When the interview aired, it didn't go viral. It didn't need to. In schools, teachers continued to reference the story when discussing ethics and choice. Not as a warning, but as a reminder that indifference can feel harmless until it isn't. The child at the center of it all was rarely mentioned by name. That absence felt respectful. The focus was never meant to be on loss alone, but on what loss demanded from those still living. One spring afternoon, the man helped organize a long table in a narrow street. Neighbors brought food from their homes. Children ran between chairs. People shared stories more than meals. He watched quietly from the side. This, he thought, was what community looked like when it didn't wait to be told what to do as the sun set. A familiar traffic light cast a red glow at the end of the street. Cars stopped. People crossed. Life moved gently forward. The man felt no urge to explain himself anymore. He knew who he was. Not because of judgment, but because of the choices he continued to make when no one was watching. And that, he understood now, was the truest form of redemption.